Hello everyone, this is Shannon from That's So Po, and today I am wrapping up my June 2021 monthly priority, which was Pride Month. If you're not familiar with my monthly priorities, I will link a video and playlist about them below, but basically I focused all of June on reading books by queer authors or about queer characters. This video, I will go ahead and wrap up talking about all of the books that I read, and then I'll talk about some of the themes that I noticed, as well as give you a recommendation for some of my favorite books that I think you should pick up. This month also the Queer Lit Readathon happened. I'm going to link all sorts of information about that below. It was only for about a week long, but I did decide to use their bingo board because I think it's so much fun for all of the reads that I did for the whole month. So I'll talk about which prompts different books satisfied as I go through what I read. So this month I read 14 books, which were by queer authors or about queer characters, 6 of which were actually on my TBR. So let me start with the ones that were from my TBR. First, I read Her Body and Other Parties by Carmen Maria Machado, who is a bisexual Latinx author. This is a short story collection that focuses on a little bit of body horror and very feminist themes and is somewhat speculative, somewhat literary. I buddy read this with Kristina at Bookworm Dreams, who I will link below, and I was very glad to buddy read this because a lot of it went over my head. There are such great themes in this, really talking about the way that women's bodies are perceived and abused and these sorts of things. But a lot of the way that these are written is more literary than it is necessarily speculative fiction, even though there are a lot of speculative elements, and some of that just I could not grasp onto. So it was really nice to have Kristina there as we read through it and try to piece together what was going on. So this one was a little bit over my head, but I know a lot of other people do like it. For the Queer Lit Readathon, this satisfied the prompts of Choose Your Own, for me is SFF, Shorter Than a Novel, Intersectional, M-Spec, and Underrepresented Identity. Next, I read Funny Boy by Shyam Selvadurai, who is a queer Sri Lankan Canadian author. This is a book that was recommended by a commenter, Leah Kay, and it is something that is really fascinating, especially in terms of the historical aspects. So the book takes place in the 1980s in Sri Lanka and focuses on a young boy who is coming of age, realizing that he is gay in a society where that's really not accepted, but also being brought up in a time when the conflict between the Tamils and the Sinhalese were really intense, so kind of sectarian violence. So this book is really, really fascinating in terms of the history. Although it does run towards the melodramatic a couple of times, I still think it was such a cool book to read. It satisfies the prompts of not set on your continent, intersectional, and recommended. Next, I finished Memorial by Brian Washington, who is a gay Black author. This is a book that I heard about from Russell at Ink and Paper Blog, who I will link below, and I'm so glad that I picked this up. For some reason, this book just really, really, really worked for me. It is about 2 men who are in a relationship, and they've been in a relationship for about 4 years, but it's kind of falling apart. And at this point, one of the men's mothers comes from Japan to stay with them, but he ends up going back to Japan to take care of his estranged father who has cancer, and so his boyfriend is left with his mother visiting. And so this is a lot about just family dynamics, a lot of very, very complicated relationships. It is so much about very flawed people who make really bad decisions in their life, but still there's this underlying current of caring for each other. And I just got so emotional from this book. I really, really loved it. This satisfies the prompts of hard-hitting contemporary, intersectional, and recommended. Next, I read Golem Girl by Riva Lehrer, who is a queer Jewish artist with spina bifida who grew up in the 1960s. This is a memoir that I heard about from Rincey at Rincey Reads, who has a review for this. Also, I have a review for this, so I will link both of those below. And this book was just fantastic. It is her memoir of growing up with a very severe disability that really meant she was in and out of hospitals for for her whole life. But it's also just so much about her family dynamics and about the way that she came into disability activism through her art. This is such a really well-written memoir that is full of humor, even when dealing with very tough topics, and I just could not put this down. I absolutely loved it. This satisfies the prompts of memoir, intersectional, religion, M-Spec, underrepresented identity, and recommended. Next, I finished The Bested It by Malik Panchali, who is a gay Indian American author. This is a contemporary middle grade that I heard about from Adri at Perpetual Pages, who I will link below, and it is just so incredibly sweet and fun. It's about a middle school boy who is dealing with a lot of bullying at school and a lot of anxiety and needs to find a way to kind of feel secure in himself. And his grandfather suggests that he finds something that he's the best at. And so this is all about him trying various different things. It has beautiful family relationships, great friendships, and it's all about that coming of age of a young gay boy. And it's just so sweet and fun. This satisfies the prompts of brings you joy, intersectional, and recommended. And the last book on my TBR that I finished was Cemetery Boys by Aidan Thomas, who is a trans Latinx author. This is a book that Adri at Perpetual Pages has a great review of, so I will link that below. And they have been shouting to the hills how great this story is, and I totally agree. I loved this book. It was so beautiful and so sweet. It's filled with all kinds of magic. It is about a teenage boy, Yadriel, who is trans, and his family practices brujeria, and he really wants to prove that he is a brujo and he can do all of the magical rites, but his family doesn't believe that he can. And so he tries to show them that he can, and accidentally brings back the ghost of somebody that he wasn't trying to bring back, and now he has to kind of help that ghost figure things out. So this is a murder mystery. It's a love story. It is filled with magic. It's filled with family dynamics. It's filled with kind of trying to find acceptance for yourself in your community, and it's just such a beautiful story. I really loved this one. This satisfies the prompts of SFF, intersectional, religion, underrepresented identity, and recommended. Now moving on to the books that I read that weren't on my TBR, starting with The Descent of Monsters and The Ascent to Godhood by Neon Yang, who is a Singaporean non-binary author. These are books 3 and 4 in the 10 Surat series, and I was so glad to finish the series because these two books were amazing. I really loved both of them. So this takes place in a silk punk world, so kind of like steampunk, but really influenced by a lot of Eastern mythology and practices and magic. And it is all about a lot of issues of empire and power. And it's an incredibly queer series. This is a world where people don't choose their genders until they're adults, where people having all kinds of different sexual preferences is totally fine, and it's filled with tons and tons of magic. The Descent of Monsters is one that is about, basically it's kind of a murder mystery story where there is a research center that has a kind of something went wrong and everybody there ends up dead. And so this is told as an epistolary through letters and reports and diary entries with people trying to piece together what happened there. And then the last book, The Ascent to Godhood, is the basically handmaiden of the Empress telling her story of her life and her work with the Empress, who was somebody that was a little bit of a tyrant, and it's got a ton of humor in it. It's just so good. So I was really happy to finish out this series. These books satisfy the prompts of SFF, shorter than a novel because they are novellas, not set on your continent, intersectional, underrepresented identity. Next, I finished The Magic Fish by Trung Le Nguyen, who is a gay Vietnamese American author. This is a graphic novel that I think is inspired by Nguyen's own life, and it is about a young boy whose family are refugees from Vietnam to America in the, I think, 1980s or 1990s, and this is all about him realizing that he is gay and trying to figure out how to tell his parents when he doesn't even know how to say that in Vietnamese and they don't speak English well enough. but it's also about the stories that they tell. So one of the things they like to do as a family is tell each other fairy tales. So the young boy will read to his parents the fairy tales that they borrow from the library written in English to help them practice English, and they'll tell stories as well. And so through these fairy tales, which are half of the book, we kind of have these allegories to a lot of what is going on in their own lives. And this is all about that kind of family relationships and immigration and, you know, coming of age and sexuality. It's really beautifully illustrated, and it's just so sweet, and I loved the family dynamics. This is a great book. So this is one that satisfies, brings you joy, and intersectional. Next, I finished Rafe, a Buff Male Nanny by Rebecca Weatherspoon, who is a pansexual Black author. This is a contemporary romance, which is about a woman, Sloane, who is a surgeon, and she has two twin daughters, and they move to a new city, and the babysitter, the nanny that Sloane has, ups and leaves suddenly, and she has to find a quick replacement, and people recommend to her Rafe, who is a guy who is a nanny. He's got lots of tattoos. He's a big guy with a big beard, a little intimidating, but he is wonderful with the children. And so he becomes their nanny, and he and Sloane start to fall in love. It is a very sweet story, a little bit on the steamy side, but it has great consent and discussion, very adult characters, a lot of fun to read. So this one satisfies, brings you joy, M-Spec, and intersectional. Next, I finished The Art of Drag by Jake Hall, illustrated by Sophie Birkin, Helen Lee, and Jasjit Singh Hans. This is a book that I heard about from Kazen at Always Doing, who I will link below, and it was wonderful. It is a nonfiction book all about the history and the art of drag, and it is all illustrated with these fantastic illustrations. It's got 3 different illustrators, and they each have a slightly different style, so it's very cool in each of the chapters to see that different stylistic choice, but all of them are done in this amazing, bright, almost neon color palette, and this book celebrates drag so much. It just makes you so excited and so interested as you read through, and these images, these beautiful, beautiful illustrations of all of the different drag outfits. It's so much fun. This satisfies, brings you joy, intersectional, and recommended. Next, I read We Are Satellites by Sarah Pinsker, who is a queer SFF author. This is a near-future science fiction book that basically has a society like our own, except that a new technology is introduced called a pilot, which is basically a neural implant that people get that helps them be a little bit better at multitasking and processing lots of input at the same time. This becomes something that basically everyone is getting, except that if you don't get it, you're kind of viewed as not sufficient. People discriminate against you. They think you can't perform. It becomes almost a disability to not have it. We look at one family, 2 women and their children, their teenage son and their younger daughter. Their daughter has seizures and is never going to be eligible to get one of these implants, but their son very much wants one. But when he gets it, it doesn't necessarily go well. So this story is so much about the choices that we make about our bodies and what kinds of modifications we're willing to do with them, and this whole medical industry as well. What's sort of regulated, what's not regulated, the ways that doctors don't necessarily listen and sometimes dismiss the symptoms that people have. It's also about this interaction between disability and medicine and society, and it's just absolutely fascinating. It is a very slow read, but I really loved everything that it had to say. So this book satisfies the prompts of SFF and intersectional. Next, I read Genderqueer by Maya Kobabe, colored by Phoebe Kobabe. Maya Kobabe is a non-binary asexual author, and this is a memoir, a graphic memoir, sort of coming of age and discovering our gender and sexuality. So this memoir is really focused on that journey, that discovery, that understanding of what the possibilities of gender and sexuality are. And I think that it really is wonderful in terms of what that journey looks like, what that exploration looks like, and how important just simply having vocabulary for so many of these things are. It does get a little bit graphic in a couple of areas, but it is just really well done. This satisfies the prompts of Memoir, Underrepresented Identity. And lastly, I read Lolly Willows by Sylvia Townsend Warner, who was a lesbian feminist author from the early 20th century. I read this as part of the Summer with Sylvia project that Anna Marie at Actual Spinster is running, so I will link that below. And this was such a beautiful book. It is about a woman growing up in the first half of the 20th century who doesn't really want the things that most people want in their lives. She doesn't want to get married, she doesn't want to have a family, and at that point in like the 1920s, it just wasn't really common for women to go and live on their own. So she's living with first her father and then later her brother and his family, until one day in middle age, she realizes that's not what she wants. She wants to be independent. She wants to live on her own and just connect to nature. And so this is all about her journey into sort of spinsterhood. And it is just beautifully written with so much nature writing, really gorgeous. Also a lot of very biting kind of commentary on the ridiculousness of society and of tradition and things like that. So it's very, very good. It gets a little bit supernatural at the end as well, which maybe wasn't so much my style, but just, oh, this was such a cool book. So I'm very glad that I read it. This satisfies the prompts of vintage, SFF, and recommended. And one other prompt that I believe I satisfied was the 40% plus BIPOC. BIPOC is a term that I definitely have been looking into, but I've found a lot of different conflicting ideas, and I'm not sure if I fully understand it yet. So if anybody has any resources for really understanding what the term BIPOC means, definitely link that for me below. I'm still trying to learn more about that. But I believe that for this month, I satisfied the 40% plus. Now I want to talk about some of the themes that I noticed across all of these books that I was reading. Quite a few things popped up again and again. Also, I noticed that a lot of the themes that I saw this month were very similar to what I saw last month, so I wonder if it's just me, or also if it's just the books that I choose. But anyway, the first theme that I noticed this month was complicated parent-child relationships. This was really big in quite a few of the books that I read. For example, in The Magic Fish, there is this barrier of language where the boy doesn't even know how to talk to his parents to communicate that he is gay. In Memorial, there are so many complicated parent-child relationships. The two men in the relationship are both very, very much struggling with especially their relationship with their fathers. Their fathers are very flawed people and have done a lot of harmful things. And so how do they negotiate that? And how do they deal with still having a relationship with their parents? In We Are Satellites, the family that we're following has very complicated relationships between the children and the parents in terms of independence, in terms of choices regarding the neural implant, just a lot of very complicated dynamics of protection versus independence. And in Golem Girl, there is such an interesting dynamic between Riva Lehrer and her mother who is somebody who was at the same time this huge advocate for her throughout her childhood with getting medical care, but also somebody who was very overprotective and also was dealing with her own disabilities and really struggled in terms of how to navigate that dynamic. So it was a huge theme in so many of these books. Another theme that I noticed was the weight of heritage. So a lot of the characters and people in these books are struggling with their desire to do things versus that burden and weight that societal expectations and their heritage especially place on them. In Funny Boy, there's a lot of weight of heritage in terms of the Tamil Sinhalese conflict. That is a huge part of the book as to who you can be friends with, who you can marry. There's also weight of heritage in terms of expectations of just what is appropriate behavior. In Memorial, there's a really interesting weight of heritage in terms of the way that one of the characters, Mike, who is Japanese American, is dealing with that conflict between being in Japan versus being in the US, and sort of how much does he owe to his father and to his kind of connection to Japan. In Lolly Willows, the main character Laura is struggling with the weight of her heritage because there's so much about the way that things have always been done that is preventing her from living the life that she wants to live. Everybody feels that of course she will just be a dependent in her family, but that's not what she wants. And it's just that getting out of that kind of tradition and heritage is very hard for her. And in Cemetery Boys, one of the key parts of this story is really focusing around the heritage of brujeria and how it works and where everybody fits into different roles. And the main character, Yadriel, is kind of bucking some of that tradition and system, and it really is struggling against that. And the last theme that I wanted to talk about is a really joyful one, and that is celebration of self. So I really liked so many of the books that I picked up this month, especially in the way that they had such a celebration of who the characters were. So in The Art of Drag, the whole book is a celebration of drag. It is filled with joy and filled with purpose and filled with power, and I loved that. In Golem Girl, Revo Lehrer is an artist who has used her art to celebrate disabled and queer bodies. And so she is using her power of art to celebrate those bodies, and it's absolutely beautiful. In Lolly Willows, when Laura, the main character, goes and lives by herself in nature, there's this celebration of her connection to nature and of her solitude and of everything that she is internally. And in The Best at It, I think that this was such a wonderful celebration of learning to find what brings you internal value. I just thought it was so heartwarming and joyful and beautiful. Okay, so the last thing I wanted to do was give you a couple of recommendations. I talked about a lot of really wonderful books this month. So if you don't have time to pick up all of these, I wanted to recommend 3 that I think are really, really worth your time. The first is The Art of Drag. I think that this is just gorgeous. It is beautifully illustrated. It is fascinating nonfiction about the history and the art form of drag, and it is all about how drag is used politically as well. It is so worthwhile and just such a joy to read. Next, I'd like to recommend Cemetery Boys, which was something that just brought me so much happiness. This is a story that is all about somebody standing up for themselves and pursuing their dreams, and also finding a community, finding love, finding people who support them, and really working with their family to kind of negotiate a new relationship. It's all about magic and brujeria and culture and heritage, and it's just such a great read. And lastly, I'd like to recommend Golem Girl, which is such an amazing memoir. I was so thoroughly enthralled throughout reading this. I think the writing is absolutely excellent. It has such humor. It has such fascinating history in terms of spina bifida and the medical system in the US, in terms of kind of the queer and disabled arts scene, in terms of disability activism. It is really fascinating, and I was just thoroughly enthralled. I definitely recommend it. Okay, so that wraps up my June reading month. If you guys have read any of the books that I mentioned, if you have any thoughts, any recommendations for me, anything at all, just leave me a comment down below.